Good evening, everyone, and welcome again. We started last week to study the fourth chapter of Tanya. I don't remember exactly where we finished, but I feel a short summary. The Rabbi is concentrating in the fourth chapter on the garments of the soul. The Rabbi explains so far that the soul is an extension of God, and the soul has three levels in the body and two outside the body. So mainly the discussion is about the three levels that are inside the body. We have discussed that intellect and emotions, in chapter 3, we discussed that the intellect, the cognitive, is the father and mother of the emotions. We love something in the proper way because our mind is convinced that this is good for us or it's beneficial for us. We hate something because we know it can lead us to something that's not happy or not healthy. That's the proper way. Now the Rabbi is talking about another facet of the soul, and that is the garments. The garments are divided into three components: thought, speech, and action. I already shared that those three are although they are called garments, what's unique about garment is A, they are external. I can live without them. B, they change based on my will. So there is no one that can say, I can't control my thought, speech, and action. There is no such a thing. And C, they actually reflect my mood. If you see the way I'm dressed, people who care about the way they dress, people who dress for an event, or people who dress to go golfing, you know in what mood they are. Sometimes the outfit, the dress is direct contradiction to the way the person behaves. And it's a conflict that it's very difficult to handle, because that will tell us about the mood of the person internally. In other words, as we'll discover later, how powerful the garments are. But there is one more point to the garments, and that is the more external the garment, the more optional and less frequent it's being exercised. So action, we don't always do something. We do when we want, and we get tired very fast. Speech, which is more internal and very powerful, perhaps more powerful than all the three, is something that we do more than action, unfortunately. And in addition, we don't get tired. We can keep talking as long as we want. And finally, thought, we must be thinking all the time. Whether we control what we think or not, that's another question. Whether we are thinking positively what we want to be thinking, that's another question. But we constantly, continuously thinking because it's more internal. So thought is more for myself, to direct me, to decide, to think about things that happen. Speech is more about me versus others. I tell people how I feel. I tell people what I want. I ask people for help. I share with people my ideas. Either I teach them or I learn from them. Action is totally separated from the person. I can build a table and I can put it a sale on a flea market by an agent, and nobody knows who the creator is, because action is totally separated from the creator. Speech, on the other hand, you have to watch me speak. Somebody knows where the sound comes from, assuming that we are taking into account that recordings and digital voice is not human voice, and it's therefore not considered the speech that we're speaking about. There's no power as far as we speak about speech. Therefore, says the Rabbi, that in order for me to serve God properly, I must develop love or fear. Fear, the Rabbi is talking about two levels: One is fear of punishment, the other is embarrassment, not to follow God's commandments. There are two ways in which we disobey God. One is called Shev ve'al ta'aseh. God said, build a sukkah, and I don't build a sukkah. God said, eat matzah, and I don't eat matzah. That's one way of disobeying God. The other way is God said, don't eat non-kosher, and I do. So transgressing actively something God had forbade us. That's a much greater prohibition, because my body, my garments are involved in disobeying God. So, for example, God said, tonight it's Passover, eat matzah, and I decided I'm not in the mood. I disobeyed God, but my garments were not involved. They did not do something in... I didn't eat something not kosher. The thought, yeah, but the action, as we will discover soon, and the more as we go down, we will see from the three garments, it's the action that counts more than anything else. And by the way, in relationship is the same thing. What I'm thinking about my children or my spouse, no value. It's all about what I do for them, right? So with the three garments, the king is action. Everything else is just part of it because it assists. Or some commandments you can only serve with speech and thought. Prayer, love your fellow friend as yourself. These are mitzvot that you cannot do with action. You do with speech, speak nicely to them, be there for them, be kind to them, listen to them. So it comes with the thinking. But most of the commandments the Rabbi is going to mention are in action. So when it comes to, for example, I start explaining, for example, comes Passover, God says, eat matzah. It's a positive commandment. I didn't eat matzah. I disobeyed God, but I did not use my garments to disobey God. But when God said, do not eat bread on Passover, and I did God forbid, ate bread, now my action was involved in defiling my soul. So therefore, to be able to love truly God and to be able to truly fear God, it expresses itself only with the action of the three garments. One of the three garments, in majority of cases, it's action. In some of them are speech and thought. So far, so good? Yes.
So when you don't do a commandment like do not eat matzah, it does not involve the garments.
It does not affect the garment.
But if you do something like eating non-kosher, that affects the garment.
The garment was involved. Yes, that's the point I was trying to make. Yes.
Yes, you said the more external, the more.
A garment,
Yeah.
the more powerful it is.
Thank you.
So thought is always there. Speech, optional. Action, much less. However, the lower the garment, the more effective the garment, as we'll discover. That's why the Torah, as the Rabbi is going to, at the end of the chapter, is going to teach us that the Torah went down to the lowest realm that God can create, the physical universe. Just like action. If I love my wife, it has to be translated in action. If it's only by speech and thought, if I give you a commitment, I give you my word, I will deliver, or I will be there for you, and I say that 10 times a day, and I didn't do it, we know not only I did not fulfill my commitment, but we know that the speech was incorrect, was not telling the truth. So therefore, action is more powerful than speech and thought. In the same way, serving God. God created it, as we'll find out, to serve God in the lowest level, the lowest realm that God can create, which is a physical universe. And creating there a human being which is very physical and mundane and materialistic, and asking them to serve God. That's when we can actually bring pleasure to God, as we'll discover later at the end of the chapter. I wanted to add one more thing before we start reading about the other aspect that Rabbi is going to talk about, and that is just like we have 248 body parts. Remember, we spoke about 365 veins, which represent the 365 negative commandments, and 248 positive commandments. They represent 248 body parts. You have large body parts like the heart, the liver. You have small body parts, so there are a total of 248. The Rabbi just, we studied last week, I did not emphasize it. The Rabbi wants us to know that God, and it's in the text, by the way, that God has 248 positive lights, different types of channels, just like a channel on television, a channel that you can flip, or another web page. It's another page on the website. There are many, many pages. Each commandment corresponds to one channel. In other words, the address on the web page, you have to put, after the main address on the page, you have to say info, contact, home, menu, pricing, time. If you don't do that, you connecting to the main page. You don't get to the particular page that you are looking for. There are 240. That's why the human being is made out of 248 parts, body parts, because God created 248 channels. So when I eat kosher, I connect with one main channel. When I eat matzah, it's all positive commandments. When I eat matzah on Passover, I connect with one particular channel that connects, light that connects to that particular one. Some channels are major, just like body parts are big. Some are very small, a small nail. A nail is a body part. There are 248, they are not big. Some of them are very small. Same is the commandment. So therefore, we're not going to talk about reincarnation and the recycling of souls, because this is not our discussion here on Tanya. What we are going to talk about is the fact that every human being, every soul must connect with all 248 channels and must connect with all 365 negative commandments. How do you connect to how do you engage the 365? By refraining. If I am passing in the airport through a hot dog stand and it smells so delicious, and I did not eat in the morning and I have another 10 hours of flight, and I still stay and I say it's not kosher, so I'm not buying it, I have connected now to that channel. Now, repeating it as many times, I get rewarded, but the connection is established. So if I keep, that's why in Judaism, you will find it on many occasions that it is important to perform every mitzvah at least one time. At least one time, perform the mitzvah. Why? And some of the major mitzvot you try and do only once. You get married only once. If you get divorced, hopefully it's only once. Many of the commandments, it's only once. By the way, in the desert, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they were commanded to bring the Paschal offering, the Pesach sacrifice. After the first time, they didn't do it for 39 years. Only upon entering the Holy Land, Joshua forced them, so to say, to do it again. What happened? It's a commandment to do it every year. But I don't know, and I'm not judging. All I'm saying is, as long as they did it once, they connected to that channel. Now we're ready to move on. We are on page 81. Before I move on, I want to share two more points. The first is, now that we see the power, and as we'll discover in a moment today, that the garments, we call them garments, are more powerful and closer to God than the soul itself. Now you can understand why in the Jewish law, maintaining a healthy body is not just a mitzvah. It's one of the 248 mitzvot, by the way, but it is one of the most important ones. And the reason is, if the soul wants to serve God, and the garments must function properly. If the garments are not, if the human is not healthy, his garments are not functioning. You can't be walking and helping someone cross the street. You cannot be eating if your body is not healthy, if you are restricted with gluten, with all kinds of stuff. So the more we maintain our health, the bigger the chance we have in serving God. Because the garments are the most precious part that we have to connect to God, we need to maintain a very, very healthy body. So going to the gym, for not just to show off my body, but to keep a healthy body, is actually a mitzvah. It's part of the routine. I don't know if anybody knows, but in Crown Heights, in the Hasidic community, after COVID, when the doctors, there was issues with heart disease as a result of recovery from COVID, they decided, the doctors told the community council, the community leaders, you must have gyms. If you don't have gyms for people to exercise, they will not be around for long. So they started renting yeshiva halls, which at the time they were closed because there was no yeshiva, and converted them to gyms, COVID distant, 6 feet apart. And they suddenly, you see all these elderly people with the overweight size and a long beard, and they are doing all the punching and all the running around. And at Quran, suddenly people realize the value of health. So now in Crown Heights, they are renting halls and renting places where they converted it to gyms. Of course, it's male only, female only, but it became, they realized that this is something that's affecting health. So therefore it becomes a mitzvah. That's why in Judaism, health is such a valuable lifestyle. The other point I wanted to make is, we did not delve into deep to it for some reasons, but the idea that Rabbi is talking about love and fear of God will motivate a person to do the right thing is not just cause and effect. In other words, an external powerful motivator. It's not just two separate entities. What the Rabbi is talking is about that the love is enclosed itself within the action. So when I am motivated by serving God out of love, that action is totally different than if I am motivated for a prize, for honor, or because everybody else does it. And that makes the action a much more powerful one. So serving God out of love and fear, it's not just that the love and fear is caused me to do it, just like a father is giving his child a little bit a reward, a chocolate or a prize to doing the right thing, but it becomes part and parcel of the service of God, of the action, and it elevates it to be a much more powerful action. You do it with fervor, you do it on time, you're running to serve God, you do it fully, you don't take shortcuts, etc. And therefore, to be motivated by love and fear of God to serve God is the ultimate way of serving God. Now we can move on. Until now, it has been explained that the divine soul has three garments in which it clothes itself: the thought, speech, and action of Torah and the commandments. The Alter Rebbe now goes on to state that unlike physical garments, which are less important than their wearer, the garments of the divine soul are even loftier than the soul which wears them. Thus, wearing its garments, that is, thinking and speaking words of Torah, and acting in performance of the commandments, elevates the soul to a higher level. For since Torah and the commandments are one with God, the Jew, by donning the garments of Torah and the commandments, also become united with them. In the Alter Rebbe's words, we're going to read it in a moment, what the Rabbi is saying. Usually when I wear garments, it's garments I can afford, meaning I am valuable so much and I spend money on garments so much. Here, garments, even though they're called garments, they are external, meaning they are inferior, meaning they are supporting the soul, yet they are much more powerful and much greater, or in the way of distance from God, they are much closer to God than the soul itself. So even though the soul is dressed through them, and the soul has the power to decide when and how, yet the garments are able to bring the soul closer to God to a place where the soul cannot reach by itself. And here is what the Rabbi is saying. Now, these three garments, deriving from the Torah and its commandments, though they are called merely garments of the Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, we are on page 82. Nevertheless, the quality of the garments of Torah and its commandments is infinitely higher and greater than that of the Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama themselves. The Neshama is dressed by them, use them as dress, but actually they elevate the person to a much higher level. For as explained in the Zohar, Torah and the Holy One, blessed be He, are entirely one. What is Torah? Torah is God's wisdom. We study in chapter 2, if anybody remembers, that God's wisdom is different than our wisdom. We acquire wisdom. You have wisdom, you have the knowledge, and you have the one who studies. You have three entities that come together. By God, there is no three entities, because if there are three entities, God is limited. God is the knower, God is the known idea, and God is the book where the knowledge is. And therefore, when God gave us the Torah, He gives us, the Torah represents God in no other way that can be compared to in this universe. This means, since Torah is the wisdom and will of the only one, blessed be He, that is, the wisdom of Torah expresses God's wisdom, its practical application and laws. For example, whether or not a particular object is kosher expresses His will. It is one with His glory and essence. When God gave us the Torah, part of the Torah is the discussion of what to do and how to do. Part of the discussion is debates, arguments, how many conditions. Does it apply in this way? Does it apply in that way? This is God's wisdom. When you reach the conclusion, it's called maskana in Hebrew, you reach the conclusion. God said, in the morning you say the Shema. You say the Shema only after sunrise, not earlier. And when is sunrise? When you see a little blue light out in the east. Now already you know God's will. So you you're studying the Torah. When you study the Torah, you're connecting with two types of connection to God you're establishing. One is God's wisdom, which is from God's wisdom is the highest level of godliness. The other is God's will. That's what He desires. He wants to see us do some things. And by studying the Torah, we find what God's will is, and we follow through. I did share with you before that there are two powers in God's realm and in human realm that are superpowers that exist everywhere, and they are pleasure and will. Willpower, you do not find a body part for. Pleasure, you do not find a body part, because my will is overwhelmingly out, and it's outside the body, and it's all encompassing. It encompasses the entire body. So when I want to get up and walk, I don't have to make commands. I don't have to give commands to different body parts to move in a certain way, because make it, and then it will be mechanical. It's very natural. Natural meaning my will is at the same time in every part of my body, and therefore each in unison, every part of my body is acting according to their will's desire and their proper function that they're supposed to. And that's what makes the human maneuver, the human life in such a natural way. The will of God is expressed in the Torah. The wisdom of God is expressed in the Torah. Those two are expressed in the Torah when someone studies Torah, like we're studying now. Since He is the knower, the knowledge, and the known, as explained above in chapter 2, in the name of Maimonides, that these three aspects, separate and distinct in terms of human intellects, are, as they relate to God, one and the same entity. They are all godliness. We discussed it in chapter 2 that by God there are no three entities. By human, you have the book with the knowledge, you have this person who studied the knowledge, and you have the knowledge itself that is transformed from the book to the person. By God, you can't have it. He never discovered something new. He never wrote something. He never read to learn something new. It's all in with God, even though it's very hard to comprehend because you're a human being. But by God, all those three components are one. And therefore, when I study God's wisdom, I am reaching out to God Himself. The Torah, being God's intellect, is thus one with God Himself. And when a Jew understands and unites himself with it, he is united with God Himself. From the above, we understand that since the garments of thought and speech and Torah study and the active performance of the commandments are united with God, they are even higher than the soul itself. Now we can understand. Neshama is only an extension of God. Wisdom is God Himself, because you cannot separate God from His wisdom. However, a question presents itself. Says the Rabbi, if it's so, there is a question. How can it be said that in understanding Torah, one comprehends God's wisdom and will, when God's wisdom, like God Himself, is infinitely beyond man's limited comprehension? This will now be explained. If you say that you grasp and you grab godliness when you study Torah, and when you serve God, you are connecting with God's will, but God is infinite. God is incomprehensible. How is it possible for a human being to connect to God? And this is what the Rabbi is going to talk about. I'm going to give you an introduction to it beforehand, so it should be easier to connect. The Rabbi said in plain words, God humbled Himself in order for us to reach to Him. And therefore He lowered Himself, not a part of Himself, because God has no parts. God Himself lowered Himself into the Torah to give each one of us a chance to connect to God. Even though God is totally beyond Torah, and God is totally beyond the idea of wisdom, definitely wisdom as we know it, but God wants us to reach out to Him. So you have Professor Einstein, who is the greatest human mind that we know of, and he has a child that's born to him at a late age, a girl, a daughter. And when she's 6 months, he slows himself and sits on the floor to play with her, building blocks, or laughing when she just moves her fingers, even though for an adult observing it can say, what are you doing here? You should be studying and discovering more knowledge, more science that exists in the universe. And what you do is total waste of time. Yes, it is a waste of time. It is infinitely far from who you reach, but he does it because he wants to have a relationship with that child. That's exactly the way God relates to us. And that's what the Rabbi is speaking about. In other words, as one of the teachers explained, the neshama, remember we talked about the neshama go through the descent of 4 universes, each universe 10 levels, some of them go to each 10 of each world, some of them skip some of them. Actually, as we'll discover, the Torah goes through the same thing. We have a partner, the Torah. The neshama from Atzilut, from where it was created, part of God, went through a great descent to reach to this universe and be part of a human, physical, materialistic human being. The Torah went through the same thing. The Torah is God's wisdom, its essence of God, goes down through many, many descents, but that goes in hiding, as we'll discover soon, to reach to the level where a human being can connect to God, and it can only connect through the Torah. So the generator in the power plant, for example, has a massive, massive power. But in order for me to benefit, to plug in a light bulb or to plug in my computer, it has to go through a transformer, to many of them actually, to lower the volume, to lower the power, the amps. And then it comes to by the street over here, and then it comes to the building, and there is a box there. And over there, it's only 30 amps or 25 amps. And then it comes to the power over here. And then I still need to put that block of the outlet to convert it into 85 volt. In other words, all those changes for me to benefit from the power. If electricity would come to me just the way it comes from the power plants, it would blow up the computer into pieces. The same is a similar way when the Torah came down. And that's what the Rabbi is going to explain. Although the Holy, I'm reading on page 83. Although the Holy One, blessed be He, is called the Ein Sof, infinite, and His greatness can never be fathomed, and no thought can apprehend Him at all, and so are also His will and His wisdom, infinite and unfathomable. The same is about wisdom and will are the same as God Himself. As we discovered, there is no separate component between God and His wisdom and His will. It's all the same thing. As it is written, there is no searching of His understanding. It's impossible to search God. And it is also written, when you will search to understand God, will you find? Job says, if you think you're going to search for God, you're going to find Him, you won't be able to, because God is infinitely far removed from us. And it is further written, for my thoughts are not like your thoughts, says God to man. So again, the prophets are filled with verses where there's no comparison between God, where God is, His thoughts, His wisdom, His will, versus us. How can you tell me that the Torah connects us? Thus, human thought is incapable of grasping divine thought. How then can it be said that in understanding Torah, man grasps God's wisdom? To this question, the Alter Rebbe answers that God compressed and lowered His wisdom, clothing it in a physical terms and objects of Torah and its commandments, so that it might be accessible to human intelligence, in order that man may thereby be united with God. So angels, who are spiritual beings, and seemingly they are closer to God because they are not finite, they are not limited to space and time and bodies, yet they do not have the tool that enables them to connect to God, because God wanted his essence to be lowered to such a low level that only physical, materialistic creature can connect with, can understand and grasp in his mind, can serve God by eating matzah, by staying away from eating not kosher, by keeping Shabbat. Doing so does not apply to angels. They don't have the idea of bodies. They don't have the idea of eating. They don't have the idea of keeping Shabbat. Therefore, they are unable to reach that far into God. Concerning this disparity between human intelligence and divine wisdom, our sages have said, page 84, where you find the greatness of the Holy One, blessed be He, there you find His humility, because God, Lord Himself, as Rabbi explains, that is, how can we approach God's greatness to find it and be united with Him, though His humility, through His humility, by His lowering Himself to our level? God compressed His will and wisdom in the 613 commandments of the Torah and their laws. As mentioned above, the logic of the law represents divine wisdom and the ruling divine will. And in the letter combinations of scriptures, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the Bible, the very letters and words of scripture contains God's will and wisdom, wherefore even one who is ignorant of their meaning fulfills the precept of Torah study by merely reciting them. And I'm going to read two more, and then I will explain that. And God's will and wisdom are also contained in the exposition of these verses found in the Agadot and Medrashim of the sages of blessed memory. In all of these, did God compress His will and wisdom in order that every neshama, or even the lower soul level of ruach and nefesh, situated as they are in the human body, will be able to grasp them with its intellect, and in order that the nefesh and ruach or neshama, fulfills them as far as they can be fulfilled in action, speech, and action. And thought. Let me explain. There is one point that the Rabbi made that I want to just point out. as we will, anyone who is joining the next JLI course, Booksmart, that puts in order everything the Torah is that we have, 120,000 books that we're reading so far, explaining them and categorizing them in a nice way. I'm sharing with you one point that will be discussed in lesson 1, and that is the understanding of what Torah is. The Torah, divided into 2 parts, but the written Torah refers to the 24 books, 5 books of Moses and 19 books of writings. Those books are called written Torah because they contain God's names. What does it mean they contain God's names? They contain light. Energy comes from God. And therefore, even if I do not understand what I'm reading, I do fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. So if someone reads Bereshit bara Elokim, the first verse of the Torah, he don't understand what he's saying. He does fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. You know why it's so important? Because by Jewish law, you're not allowed to study Torah without reciting the blessing for the Torah prior. In the morning, every morning, we say that blessing. And if someone wants to study Torah, even if he don't understand, just reading it, he must say the blessings first. On the other hand, Medrash is part of the oral tradition. Agadah is part of the oral tradition. Torah Shebe'al Peh, the Talmud, Mishnah, Talmud are oral tradition. Why is it so important to know that it's oral tradition? Because it must be fully understood. If you don't understand what you're studying, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. So if someone is reading text from the oral tradition and he has no clue what he's reading, he don't have to say the prayer. If someone wants to fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah, they must fully understand what they are saying, because it has to be grasped by the brains. If it was grasped by action or speech, it did not fulfill the mitzvah. That's what oral tradition. Oral is maintained here. It has to be going through the mindset, to the intellect, and only then you fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. So if you don't understand what you're saying, even though you're thinking about the words, and you know the words, what they mean, but you don't understand what you're saying, you did not study Torah. Says the Rabbi. Now you're going to go back to other, and this is in the text here. Says the Rabbi, if you study Torah, what God did was he decided to create creatures who can serve him by action or by speech and thought. Speech and thought is through the study of Torah. Action is through serving, fulfilling his will, which is eating matzah, keeping Shabbat, celebrating holidays, helping the poor, all the commandments that involve action. When a person, when God wanted to have a relationship with us, he lowered himself, he humbled himself to a point where we can connect to it. So therefore, the Torah, as we'll discover soon, the Torah descended just the same way the Neshama went down, so did the Torah went down, and it reached this physical universe. Now we can understand why action counts in Judaism. Now we can understand why in relationship action counts, because it's a reflection between the relationship between us and God. Now we understand why the angels are all jealous of the Jewish people, because they don't have the mitzvah of tzitzit. They don't have the mitzvah of studying Torah. They don't have the mitzvah of honoring your father and mother. They don't have the mitzvah of eating kosher or celebrating Shabbat. That have nothing for them. Why is it so important? Because these are the channels. It's a connection that establishes between us and God. They do not possess that because they don't have the body. They don't have the physical body. Therefore, they don't have the ability. Now we can understand why the garments are more powerful than the soul. Because the soul is just like an angel. It's a spiritual entity. Spiritual entity have nothing to do with Torah. Spiritual entity have nothing to do with commandments. God's will cannot be fulfilled by a spiritual entity. God's wisdom cannot be grasped by a spiritual entity. It can only be grasped and fulfilled only with the 3 garments. Therefore, those garments gift or enable the soul to reach to God, which no other spiritual entity is able to. Any questions so far?
Yes, I do have a question. You've told us in the past when you pray in Hebrew, you pray at a higher level. When we pray in other languages, which there are many Jews who do not have the command of Hebrew to read or speak or to pray and so on, why are they at a disadvantage? Or are they even with the rest of the Jews that pray in Hebrew, or are they not?
I don't remember what I told you. I know one thing. I told you a lot of things.
I'm quoting you. You did say when you
So
pray
that-
in Hebrew, it's a better way to pray.
Let me explain, okay? There are two parts to the prayer. One part of the prayer is thanking God, to thank God, and the other part of the prayer is asking for our needs. The prayer was composed by the sages to include every single desire or need a person might have. So they did the job for us. The way they did it in the Hebrew language. Because some words in the Hebrew language are multifaceted, multi words, and they can mean totally opposite. Today in the Talmud class, which you missed, we discovered the word violation and the word starting are the same word in Hebrew. Le'atchil, lo yachel, chilul, also atchala. Chet lamed is the same word for violating and the same word for the starting, the startup. And that makes an opinion in the Talmud that's very, very different from others, because he's taking that word and say, oh, it's two different meanings. There must be a connection between them and they must be applied to each other. There are words in Hebrew that have 3 or 4 different meanings that are totally separated. For example, we studied 3 weeks ago, Vayigash, when Yehuda comes to Yosef. Yehuda stands before Yosef. He didn't know it's Yosef, it's the viceroy of Egypt. He says to him, if you're asking me, why am I defending Benjamin? He says, Ki avdecha, because you master, you slave, you servant, Arav etanar. Arav, the word Arav, etanar. Arav means guarantor. In Hebrew, when you go to a bank to borrow, they ask you for arevim. They ask you for guarantors. Arev is a guarantor. So Yehuda says to Yosef, I am the one who guaranteed the safety of the child to his father. That's why I'm defending him and I'm standing up for him. But the word Arab, the same word, has at least 2 more. And Arab, Aravi, is Medinat Arab, the country of Arab. They're same. But the word Arab has 2 other. Arab also means sweet, Arab. And Arab also means mixed together, like Eruv. Anybody heard the Eruv on Shabbat? You do Eruv? Mixing, you put a wire. Anybody heard of the Eruv? It's the Rabbi explains that all 3 are connected because they're totally different words, but yet because it's the same word in Hebrew, depends where you're speaking about, and makes it that all 3 must be connected. So, having said that, the prayer should be said in every language possible. The prayer said in any language will be heard by God. However, here is the caveat, and that's what I said, and that's what I stick to. It is, if I do not pay attention to what I am saying, if it's done in different language, it will not ascend to God. If I do say it in Hebrew, it will be ascending to God. There are parts of the prayer that you must think of what you say. One of them is Poteach et Yadecha in Ashrei. There was one verse in the Shema Israel. Shema Israel, you must think. That's why we close our eyes to concentrate. Also, the first 3 blessings of the Amidah, according to Jewish law, if you do not concentrate and think what you're saying, you have to go back. Now, even if in Hebrew, but that's the exception. Otherwise, if I say, and believe me, there is a very famous stories of yeshiva boy that was praying the Amida, and when he was done, the rabbi came to him, his master comes to him, said, shake his hand, Shalom Aleichem, welcome back. How was your trip? And the guy says, what trip? I'm sitting here, I'm here. He says, by the time when you prayed the Amida, looking at you, I saw that you're traveling all around the globe. Now you just landed, you finished the Amida, you just landed back, so welcome. We cannot concentrate. That's the power of Hebrew language. Hebrew language is a language the angels understand, and they carry it to God, even if I had no meaning, except the exceptions. That's why every prayer, if you pay attention, that is said together and cannot be said unless you have a minyan, is not in Hebrew, it's Aramaic. The Kaddish cannot be said by yourself. If you say it yourself, it will have no power. It can be only done in a mitzvah minyan, and it's in Aramaic. Aramaic is a language that the angels don't understand. So only when you have a minyan, it gets carried, because a minyan is very powerful to connect to God. Brich Shmei, before you open in the ark, you say a prayer. It's in Aramaic. Why? You can't open up and read from the Torah without a minyan. So you say it in Aramaic. Does that help you?
Yes, to some extent. The commentary I want to make is I know a lot of Jews that do read Hebrew, or they have learned to read the prayers because they've done it so many times. I heard them say, I don't know what I'm praying, but I'm praying, and they're very...
I say that too sometimes.
Well,
I'll be honest.
You understand?
I understand, but concentrating for so long, it takes a lot of effort. And to be honest with you, during the week, sometimes I wonder, did I say it? Where am I standing? Actually, the Code of Law has many questions about somebody who is in the middle of the Shema. There are words that appear in the first chapter of Shema, or Vayam Shema, the second chapter. It's all about binding the tefillin and putting on mezuzah. Code of Law says, if you say it and you're not sure, if you're in the first chapter or the second chapter, what do? And the Code of Law tells us, depends if you're part of the minyan and you see that they are at the end, so probably on the second, otherwise you start from the first. But 70-80% of the prayer, it's hard to concentrate, to be honest. What Hasidim do is they try once a year, one complete prayer in concentration. So for example, they will try 1 week to concentrate on the first chapter of the morning prayer. Another week, they will go for the second chapter. They will put a little marking. So they know that week they concentrate. So when it's segregated to a one part and it's only 2 or 3 minutes, if you didn't do it, you say it again until you know your mind is into it. Also, there are exercises. The Rabbi told many times to many people, you cannot concentrate. You know what the solution? A very simple solution.
Do it again.
No, look in the text and read it, but make sure you read it because it's written in the text, not because you know it by heart. Me, myself, or people like me know probably all of the prayer by heart. And when you look in the book, you actually don't look at the text. You look at the text, but you say it because you know it. And that's what gives the mind to wander. So what we do is we take one chapter and we say, I'm not going to say any word here unless I read it in the text, not because I know it, even though I know the chapter of Psalm or that section very well. So the next week, they study one more section. By the end of the year, at least they have one complete prayer. And hopefully that prayer is the engine that carries all the other prayers.
no matter the language that is written.
It doesn't matter the language. Now, if you're asking me, and it's part of Jewish law, what's preferred, to say it without thinking what you say, or to say it in your language that you understand? As I told you, if you don't understand what you're saying in foreign languages, there's no meaning. There's no doubt that you should say it in the language that you understand. It establishes a better connection. Can we continue?
if you understand it.
Thereby clothing itself with all its 10 faculties in these 3 garments of the thought, speech, and action of Torah and Mitzvot. The rabbi goes on, continue about Torah. Therefore, has the Torah been compared to water? Anybody read somewhere where the Torah is compared to water? Nobody?
Yeah, water is life.
Like life, exactly. Torah is compared to water for many reasons, but here is the Kabbalistic explanation. For just as water descends from a higher level to a lower level, the water which reaches the lower level is the same water that left its source within the higher level. Unlike light, for example, which also travels from its source, but in those cases it is not the source, the luminous body itself that is transmitted, but only a ray of it. And unlike intellect, which can also be communicated from one person to another, but in whose case, too, it is not the source, the teacher's mind itself, that transmits itself to the lower level, the student's mind, but only the idea, a product of this source. Same, just as we find this in the analogy of water, so is Torah descended from its place of glory, that is the lofty spiritual plane, which is its source. Let me explain what the Rabbi is saying in the commentary. The Torah is compared to water. Why? Water will always find the lowest plane to reach to. The Torah also descended down. But one can ask, why compare the Torah to water? Compare the Torah to light. Compare the Torah to wisdom, to intellect. And what the commentators explain is when it comes to light reaches very far, but it's not the luminous, it's not the body of light itself. It's a ray that goes very far. But the light, the source itself, remains up high. Water, when the water goes down on a river, it's the same exact water that was up there you'll find down here. Same is intellect. When a teacher is a great teacher and he's sharing wisdom with a student, the student is the lower level of recipient, but it's only the knowledge that the teacher chose to share. It's a ray of the knowledge. It's not the knowledge itself. The knowledge itself always remains with the teacher. When it comes to water, the essence of the idea of the thing itself goes down. The Torah, the Rebbe wants to remind us that in Judaism we compare the Torah to water because the Torah that was up there is the same Torah that's here. There is no veils, there is no curtains, there is no changes. When you study Torah like we do tonight here, we are connecting with the essence of God. When we fulfill God's will by discovering God's commandments, we are serving God's will. No one else can ever serve God's will in the same way. In its original state, it is God's will and wisdom, and Torah is one and the same with God, whom no thought can apprehend at all. On that plane, Torah is incomprehensible to man as it's God itself. However, from there, the Torah is journeyed in a descent through hidden stages, stage after stage, in the ishtalshelut of the worlds, that is the chain link order of interconnected spiritual worlds, explained more fully in chapter 2. Torah descends through all these levels until it clothes itself in material matters and thinks of this corporal world, which comprises nearly all the Torah's commandments and their laws. Let me share with you what the Rabbi is saying is the Torah up there, which is essence of God, it's impossible for a human being to reach. However, it went down through many descents until it's able to clothe itself in the Torah. Just like the neshama, the soul, went through that journey, the neshama is part of God. It's too powerful to be in a body, but it went through the descents. However, when it comes to the Torah, there is a prayer from Psalm that we say every morning. I'm going to share with you 3 verses from Psalm that we actually recite every morning, that perhaps you can explain what they mean. I'm not sure you could, but based on what we study, it will be very well understood. Every morning we say Psukei de Zimra. Before the Shema, to introduce, to praise God, we speak about God's creation and God's creativity. One of the verses we say is Psalm 147, I think. Psalm 147. I'm going to read, it's a large chapter, but there is, perhaps you can explain you what it said. It's a very poetic language. He satiates you with his finest wheat, not that. He sends, pay attention to what I'm reading. He sends forth his command to the earth. His word runs most swiftly. He gives snow like fleece. He scatters frost like ashes. He hurls his ice like morsels. Who can withstand his cold? He sends forth his word and melts them. He causes his wind to blow, and the waters flow. And now God, the conclusion is, he tells his words, Torah, to Jacob, his statutes to an ordinance to Israel. Anybody understand what I just read?
No.
No. Ali, did you understand? You know, you say it every morning. What the rabbi is saying is that he's sending his words, the Torah, and his will and commandments are running very swiftly, very fast. And he gives snow. Suddenly he's talking about snow like fleece and frost like ashes. And then he throws away the snow and he sends his words to melt them. He melts the snow and he blows winds and water comes out. And the Torah, he gives his words to the Torah, to Jacob, and his rules. It's very hard to understand that, but according to what we just studied, this is what it means. The Torah is like water, right? That's the way the Torah is by God. But in order for it to remain whole and no one grab any of it, he freezes it. He freezes the Torah into snow. And that's when the descent can take place. It does not get tainted. No bacteria can grow underwater. When it comes down here, if he antifreeze it, he defrost it. And now he gives out the water in the Torah and his commandments. And the conclusion is Magid Varav LeYaakov Chokav uMishpatat LeIsrael. He gives his word to Jacob, his rules and laws to Israel. The text here, King David is referring to a teaching of Kabbalah, that the Torah is compared to water. And the reason not to light or wisdom is because the essence comes forth the way it came from God. Yet, in order for it to reach here, it is exactly the way it is in God's essence. In order for it to reach here, it had to go through many descents to enter into the physical realm, where you talk about 2 oxen that are fighting, or I am stealing money, or how do I earn a living, or don't muzzle my ox when I shouldn't muzzle my ox when I plow the field, when I harvest the field, etc. Literal commandments that deal with the physical universe. In order for it to come to this universe and be fresh water, in other words, fresh the Torah, God needed to take the water and freeze them, make it snow, and make it frost and snow, and then it can come down and no one can grab any. It doesn't get lost. No drops are left somewhere, and there's no holes that it can be out because it's one big block. And when it comes here, it defrosts it again. Now you can have the Torah, now you can have the commandments. So I'm here to tell you, when you study Torah, the bond between God and us is like nothing else. When we fulfill God's will, we serve God and fulfill His will by every one of the commandments, like there is no other way in any universe or any entity that can be fulfilled. And with that, we will conclude tonight and continue, God willing, next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Rabbi.